All right. All right, so we are recording now, and I'm going to share tab. What? No. This is what.
Hang on.
Okay, so here's George Bev Shea singing Blue Galilee.
I stood by the side of the murmuring sea of Galilee, blue Galilee, when the sunshine its beauty revealed unto me, blue Galilee, sweet Galilee. Then I thought of my Savior, who years long ago came to tell the glad story, his love to bestow. As he stood by the side of that murmuring sea of Galilee, blue Galilee. I sailed in a ship on that billowy sea of Galilee, blue Galilee, while the voice of the tempest was saying to me, blue Galilee, sweet Galilee. Then I thought of the hearts who once tossed on the wave, when they cried in their peril to him who could save. How the Master spoke peace to that billowy sea of Galilee. Blue
All right, so thank you, Rich, for sharing that song with all of us.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that is beautiful. And we'll get a chance to sail on the Sea of Galilee while we're there. And I've been out on the Sea of Galilee many, many times. I've never been in a storm like the one, in the Gospels. Of course, we wouldn't go out if it was stormy like that. Most of the time, it's been very, very calm. But we've been out in some choppy waters in the past, which is kind of fun. And it's a great experience, great boat ride. So the Lord Jesus and the disciples often were out on the Sea of Galilee. Fishermen still go out in fishing boats and fish on the sea. So we're looking forward to that. Well, last time we had just started looking at the city of Jerusalem. And I want to talk tonight about Jerusalem and some other things. I want to go through the review questions for tonight's session with you. So here's what we're going to be talking about. if we can show on a map of Israel the location of the following sites. This is what we're going to talk about: Jerusalem. Then we're going to move to Bethlehem. Bethlehem is just a little bit south of Jerusalem. Then Masada. From Masada, we're going to be down by the Dead Sea near the south end. And then the Dead Sea itself. So those are our 4 topics for tonight. Doesn't sound like very much, only 4. But we've got so much to say about Jerusalem. It'll be a full night, definitely. Okay, here's another question. What was the name of Jerusalem in each of the following periods? And we want to talk about that, various names. So it had a name in the pre-Israelite 3rd millennium BC. It had a pre-Israelite 2nd millennium BC name, and then it had an Israelite name. So 3 different names for the same city. 3, who was the king of Jerusalem in the time of Abraham? Many of you probably know that one without any problem. Who ruled Jerusalem at the time of the conquest of Canaan under Joshua, when the Israelites entered into the promised land? Get rid of this box here. Who was responsible for building the first temple in Jerusalem? What was the approximate date? When were Jerusalem and the temple destroyed and Israel carried into Babylonian captivity? Who was the Babylonian king who was responsible for this destruction and captivity? When and under what conditions did Israel return from Babylonian captivity? At this time, we're calling it Babylonian in quote marks for a reason that will be obvious when we talk about it. Number 9, who was responsible for building the second temple in Jerusalem? So there's been a sequence of temples. First temple, second temple. And what was the approximate date? 10, what Seleucid ruler defiled the temple and when? 11, who greatly expanded the temple complex and when? 12, who destroyed the second temple and when? 13, who erected temples to Juno and Minerva on the Temple Mount and when? 14, what was Jerusalem renamed after its destruction? So here's another name for Jerusalem, besides the 3 we were just looking at. 15, who built the Dome of the Rock and El-Aqsa mosques on the Temple Mount? And when did that take place? 16, what are the dates of the British Mandate? 17, what was the official British position on the Jews' relationship to Palestine, and what notable document supports this position? 18, what was the status of Jerusalem according to the UN partition plan of 1947? 19, what was the status of Jerusalem as a rebuilt, as a result of Israel's War of Independence in 1948? 20, what was the status of Jerusalem as a result of the 6 Days War of 1967? Okay, now we're going to move on to Bethlehem. So that's 20 questions pretty much dealing with Jerusalem. It is a very, very involved subject. There's probably no city on the face of the earth with as complex a history as the city of Jerusalem. We're going to try to set some of these things in order so that when we are there and you're looking at things, you know what you're looking at and you know something about the history behind them. Okay, with regards to Bethlehem, what was the earlier name for Bethlehem? To what tribe was Bethlehem allotted? Where does the Old Testament prophesy that Christ will be born in Bethlehem? What is Emperor Hadrian known for in connection with Bethlehem, and when was that? 25, what is Jerome known for in connection with Bethlehem and when? And I just spotted a misspelling. I should have had N on the end of known. I'll have to fix that later. 26, when was the Church of the Nativity first built? 27, who built the present church and when? This Church of the Nativity, by the way, is, obviously built on the spot where it is reputed that Christ was born. And it's been through quite a history itself, just that church. And it's an amazing church to visit. You'll really enjoy that. 28. What is a possible Old Testament reference to Masada? So now we're going down by the Dead Sea, done with Bethlehem, down in the Syrian-African Rift Valley. So possible Old Testament reference to Masada. 29. Who built a fortress on Masada, and when did that take place? 30. Who expanded the building up of Masada, and when? 31. Who used Masada as a base for raiding and harassing the Romans during the Jewish rebellion against Rome? 32. When did the Romans finally breach the wall of Masada, and who was the commander of these Roman forces? 33. What is the elevation of the surface of the Dead Sea? Okay, now, last topic, the Dead Sea itself. Now, obviously, the elevation of the surface, somebody already noted that we've heard various statistics. Mm-hmm. So all these bodies of water can rise and fall depending on various conditions. And that's why you sometimes find different numbers. Okay, 34. What is the percentage of mineral content of the waters of the Dead Sea? Really an amazing statistic. 35. What naturally occurring organic substance besides salt can be found floating on the surface of the Dead Sea? Here's our last question. In the Old Testament times, the Dead Sea formed a border between Israel and what other nations? So that helps us with a lot of our Old Testament reading when we understand these things. So we're going to get into all that. We're going to start by looking at Jerusalem. And before I start into my presentation, there's a pretty good video put out by the History Channel on the history of Jerusalem. It's about, I think, 20 minutes in length. And I want to share that with you. So let me bring that one up. This is it here. Okay, and this will actually answer a number of those questions on that that review sheet, and it has a lot of other things. I'll watch this to be sure that it didn't have any bias one way or the other with regards to Israel, the Jews, Palestinians, and all that. And it's pretty good. There are one or two spots that I kind of winced a little bit at, but it's almost impossible to find something online that doesn't have some bias in it. But this is a pretty good history.
Jerusalem. Without doubt, the most revered holy city in the world. With a history stretching back almost 5,000 years, it has been at the epicenter of three of the world's major religions, with Jews, Christians, and Muslims each laying claim to the holy city. This has, perhaps unsurprisingly, resulted in Jerusalem being one of the most disputed and fought over places anywhere in the world. The city has been the prized possession of empires, kingdoms, and religious movements over the centuries, leading it to changing hands no fewer than 40 times. The repercussions which have been generated from these long-standing grievances continue to leave their mark on Jerusalem well into the 21st century. But how did this city, which began as little more than a settlement around a water spring, become one of the most religiously and politically contentious places on earth? This is how Jerusalem became the world's holiest city. You can now watch, as well as listen to all of our videos over on Spotify. The earliest history of Jerusalem dates back to 3000 BC, when the foundations of the settlement were first established near Gihon Spring. This major water source enabled Jerusalem's earliest inhabitants to transform what was otherwise a barren and arid landscape into what would one day become one of the most important cities in the world. By around 2000 BC, Jerusalem lay just beyond the borders of the Middle Egyptian kingdom. It was around this time that the first known written mention of the city, Jerusalemum, was recorded in their documents. The city itself was occupied by a people known as the Canaanites, who had built a large stone wall around the settlement to protect its valuable water source. By 1500 BC, the city had come under the rule of the Egyptian New Kingdom as a vassal state, forming part of their territory, which stretched from the Sahara all the way to the borders of what is now Turkey. The power of the Egyptians began to decline by the 12th century BC, during a period of history known as the Late Bronze Age collapse. This era saw many of the empires and civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean fall into rapid and often violent decline. In their wake arose many smaller independent kingdoms across the region, one of which was the Israelites, a faction of the Canaanites who, according to biblical tradition, were led by King David and came to occupy Jerusalem by 1000 BC, making it the capital of their new Kingdom of Israel. During the reign of David's successor, King Solomon, a grand temple, later known as the Temple of Solomon, was constructed within the city, cementing its status as a major cultural and religious site for what would evolve into the Judaic religion. Within a century, however, the Kingdom of Israel had split in two, with the northern half remaining under its rule, whilst the southern half became the Kingdom of Judah, with Jerusalem as its capital. Over the next 400 years, Jerusalem developed as the epicenter of the Jewish faith and culture, although it faced frequent attacks by its more powerful neighbors, namely the Egyptian and Assyrian kingdoms, who were both vying for dominance across the region. Then, in the 6th century BC, Jerusalem experienced the first of what would be several pivotal transitions of power in its history. The successor to the powerful Assyrian Empire in the region was the Babylonian Empire, led by King Nebuchadnezzar II. He sought to expand his territorial holdings and successfully besieged Jerusalem in 597 BC. Despite taking the city, the Babylonians faced significant resistance from the local Jewish population, which ultimately led to a rebellion just over a decade later, in 587 BC. In response, Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem once more and destroyed much of the city, including Solomon's temple. This act of retribution was furthered by his order for the expulsion of the city's Jewish inhabitants, who were subsequently exiled to parts of Babylonia in the east. Jerusalem remained part of the Babylonian Empire for the next 40 years, until it was absorbed by the rapidly expanding successor empire of the Achaemenids under King Cyrus the Great. Cyrus allowed many of the exiled Jews.
Just note here that the Achaemenid Empire was the Persian Empire. Okay? So it goes by both those names. It was a Persian Empire.
To return to Jerusalem and rebuild the city, including its temple. Over the following 200 years, further waves of exiled Jews and their descendants returned to Jerusalem. However, they still did not control the city for themselves. In 332 BC, possession of Jerusalem changed hands yet again, when Alexander the Great conquered it as part of his campaign against the Persian Empire. Alexander's reign over the enormous empire that he carved out for himself was nevertheless short-lived, and following his death in 323 BC, it was divided up amongst his generals. Jerusalem initially fell under the control of the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. However, following several centuries of almost constant warfare, it passed into the control of the Seleucids in 198 BC. Starting under Alexander's reign and continuing under the subsequent Ptolemaic and Seleucid rule, many Jews within Jerusalem became adoptees of Greek culture. Although this shift away from traditional Judean practices eventually provoked unrest, which, during the 160s BC, erupted into rebellion led by a Jewish group known as the Maccabees. They captured Jerusalem in 164 BC and restored Jewish worship at the temple, an event still celebrated today in the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. Following what became known as the Maccabean Revolt, Jerusalem then became the capital of a semi-autonomous region within the wider Seleucid Empire, and later formed the center of the fully independent Hasmonean Kingdom, which lasted for well over a century. This period of independence, however, came to an end in 37 BC, following the rise of Herod the Great, who captured the city and established his reign as a client king of the rapidly expanding Roman Republic. Nevertheless, within just 30 years of this, the Roman Republic went on to absorb the city of Jerusalem as part of the province of Judea, which it now governed under direct rule. The Romans were well known for their deployment of strategy and tactics in the ancient world. But if you have ever considered creating your own game-changing strategies to overcome the green stable until in the early 1st century CE, during its incorporation under Roman rule in the early 1st century CE, Jerusalem's population reached an estimated 70,000 to 100,000 people. The vast majority of these were Jewish. Yet a small but growing minority had become converts to a new sect of Judaism that had emerged within the city following the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. As a result of this, Jerusalem became the birthplace of early Christianity, with the apostles spreading the teachings of Jesus and establishing the faith's first churches, which expanded across the region in subsequent years. Jerusalem's status as a center of religious worship, however, brought with it its own set of problems. The Roman authorities, who still practiced a form of paganism, viewed both Judaism and the nascent Christianity as threats to their rule, and consequently introduced suppressive measures on religious practice. In the year 66 CE, the Jewish population of Judea rose up in rebellion against Roman rule, sparking the First Jewish-Roman War, also known as the Great Revolt. Jerusalem was the epicenter of the rebellion, and therefore attracted the full force of the Romans' brutal response. Following a 5-month siege in 70 CE, the Roman legions reconquered the city and destroyed much of it in an effort to stamp out any future challenges to their authority. The Second Temple was razed to the ground, leaving only its great external walls, a surviving portion of which, now known as the Western or Wailing Wall, remains as a sacred site in Jewish worship to this day. Following its destruction, Jerusalem was rebuilt as the Roman colony of Aelia Capitolina, with the Jewish people themselves being explicitly forbidden entry into the settlement, with the exception on a few select holy days. This led to another revolt by the Jews in 132 CE, which was brutally suppressed by the Emperor Hadrian. He went on to intensify the Romanization of the city by constructing a forum and a temple dedicated to Jupiter on the site formerly occupied by the Jewish temple. With the expulsion of Jews from the city, Jerusalem became a center of predominantly Christian worship. The Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, himself a convert to Christianity, sent his mother, Helena, to Jerusalem to locate the site of Jesus' crucifixion and burial. The area that she subsequently identified was occupied by the Roman temple built under Hadrian. This was promptly pulled down and, in its place, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was constructed in the year 335 CE, which from that day forth became the focal point of Christian worship within the city. By the turn of the 5th century, the Roman Empire had begun to decline, although its eastern territories remained relatively intact. The Byzantine Empire, which emerged as the spiritual successor to Rome, maintained control of Jerusalem for nearly 300 years and championed its position as the holiest place within Christendom. However, an entirely new power, as well as an entirely new religion for that matter, was about to leave its mark upon the Holy City. The emergence of Islam within the Arabian Peninsula at the outset of the 7th century ushered in a new chapter in Jerusalem's history. The city quickly gained sacred significance for Muslims, as it was believed that the Prophet Muhammad had journeyed there in a single night. Following Muhammad's death in the year 632, the Rashidun Caliphate united the Muslims of Arabia and began to spread Islam across the region. In 638, Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab led his Muslim armies to the gates of Jerusalem and successfully captured it from the Byzantines. Despite being under Muslim rule, Jerusalem flourished as a city of religious tolerance, where freedom of worship was granted to all inhabitants, regardless of faith. Although it retained a predominantly Christian population, the Islamic Caliphate allowed Jews to return and worship freely in the city, thereby lifting the nearly 300-year ban imposed by the Romans and Byzantines. Within just over 100 years, Under the governance of the successor Umayyad dynasty in the late 7th and early 8th centuries, Jerusalem gained two of Islam's most important and sacred sites, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The construction of these sites not only elevated Jerusalem's status to rival other holy cities like Mecca and Medina within the Muslim world, but it also firmly established Islam as an integral part of Jerusalem's identity, alongside the other two Abrahamic religions, Judaism and Christianity. As the dawn of the new millennium approached, however, the era of religious tolerance in Jerusalem began to wane. In 969, the Fatimid Caliphate captured Jerusalem as part of their conquest of Egypt and Syria. Christian and Jewish pilgrims were still permitted to visit the holy city, although with time, the Fatimid administration increasingly began to impose restrictions and persecute the non-Muslim communities within its borders. One infamous event occurred in 1009 when Caliph al-Hakim bi-Amir Allah ordered the destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which sent shockwaves throughout the Christian world. Although the church was reconstructed in subsequent years, its initial destruction caused widespread grievances among many Christians, who believed that their holy sites within Jerusalem were being desecrated. Matters of religion were further complicated by the Great Schism of 1054, which saw the formal division of the Christian world between the Roman Catholic Church in the west and the Greek Orthodox Church in the east. Although the split was rooted in long-standing theological, political, and cultural differences, it also reflected competing claims over who had authority within Christendom. Following the schism, Jerusalem came under the jurisdiction of the Greek Orthodox Church, centered in Constantinople, much to the outrage of the papacy in Rome. By the late 11th century, the Fatimid Caliphate faced growing internal instability, as well as external threats. In 1073, Jerusalem fell to the Seljuk Turks, who had expanded across the Middle East from Central Asia. Seljuk rule introduced a period of political and social disruption in Jerusalem and across the Holy Land, with reports reaching Europe that Christian pilgrims were being harassed by the Turks on their way to visit holy sites. The Seljuk advance across the region also posed a direct threat to the Byzantine Empire, prompting Emperor Alexios I Komnenos to request military assistance from the Christian West and the papacy in 1095. Although the appeal was primarily aimed at repelling the Seljuks from Byzantine lands, Pope Urban II reinterpreted the message at the Council of Clermont as a call for a holy crusade to reclaim Jerusalem in the name of Christendom. Motivated by faith and the promise of spiritual reward in heaven, thousands of European knights and commoners embarked on the nearly 2,000-mile journey to the Holy Land. Meanwhile, the Fatimids briefly recaptured Jerusalem from the Seljuks in 1098. However, just over a year later, in June 1099, the army of the First Crusade reached the city's walls and began a siege lasting several weeks. On the 15th of July, the Crusaders successfully breached the walls and then unleashed a massacre upon the city's inhabitants, practically wiping out the Muslim and Jewish populations. Following the conquest of Jerusalem, most Crusaders returned home to Europe, although a small number chose to remain behind and help establish the Kingdom of Jerusalem, one of several Christian Crusader states that emerged in the region. Within the city, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was rebuilt in a Western Romanesque style, whilst the Muslim shrines on the Temple Mount, including the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, were repurposed for Christian use. Following the Crusader takeover of the city, there was a significant increase in the number of Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land from Europe, who all required accommodation, food, and transportation during their journey. In response to this, several Christian military orders were founded to protect and care for these pilgrims, with the Knights Hospitaller being headquartered near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the Knights Templar, who established their base at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Although the Crusaders had secured control of Jerusalem, their grip over the wider region weakened in the following century with the rise of Saladin, the founder of the Ayyubid dynasty. Saladin sought to restore Muslim dominance over the Holy Land, and, after winning a decisive victory over the Crusader army at the Battle of Hattin in July 1187, he moved his forces to recapture Jerusalem in a week-long siege. Under Saladin's rule, many of the Christian sites in the city were either destroyed or converted into Islamic buildings. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre was spared, but handed over to the Greek Orthodox Church. News of Jerusalem's fall to the Muslims nevertheless prompted the call for the Third Crusade in 1190. Led by King Richard I of England and King Philip II of France, this expedition restored much of the Crusader states' territories in the region, but ultimately failed in its primary objective of recapturing Jerusalem. In the 13th century, control of Jerusalem remained a source of conflict between Christians and Muslims. Despite the city's fortifications being dismantled in 1219 to reduce its strategic and military value, many European nations continued to launch successive crusades in the hope of reclaiming Jerusalem in the name of Christendom. Although the Crusaders were able to retake the city between 1229 and 1244, their efforts were ultimately in vain, for the last Crusader state was driven out of the Holy Land in 1291, following the rise to prominence of the Islamic Mamluk Sultanate across the region. Under the Mamluks, Jerusalem continued to attract pilgrims of all faiths, though the Christian and Jewish populations of the city were by now greatly diminished. After some 300 years of Mamluk rule, Jerusalem became part of the Ottoman Empire in 1516. During the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, the city's walls were rebuilt, ushering in a period of relative religious tolerance, with synagogues, churches, and mosques all peacefully coexisting in close proximity. Ottoman rule over Jerusalem was largely uneventful, and as time passed, the city gradually lost its significance, experiencing a period of general decline and economic stagnation into the 18th century. By the 19th century, Jerusalem had become little more than a provincial backwater within the Ottoman Empire, with a population of barely 8,000 people. The city's inhabitants, comprising of Jews, Christians, Muslims, and Armenians, Orthodox Christians, lived within their respective, but not wholly exclusive quarters, with the Muslims near the Temple Mount in the northeast, the Christians near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in the northwest, the Jews near the Western Wall in the southeast, and the Armenians around the Zion Gate in the southwest. As the 19th century progressed, the Ottoman Empire began to show signs of decline, prompting the European powers to look eastward in anticipation of filling the emerging power vacuum. Many nations re-established a presence within Jerusalem, constructing new churches, consulates, and other institutions. This renewed interest in the city was not just confined to European Christians, for European Jews also began returning to Jerusalem. Many who were fleeing persecution in Eastern Europe formed a steady stream of emigrants to the city who wished to worship freely in what was perceived as their ancestral homeland. By the 1860s, Jerusalem remained confined to an area of just 1 square kilometer and was becoming increasingly overcrowded. This led to calls for the construction of a new city outside the ancient walls. One of the first major projects to be built was the Russian compound, which housed an Orthodox church, a consulate, and accommodation for Russian pilgrims. New Jewish settlements also began to appear beyond the confines of the old city, largely driven by figures such as Sir Moses Montefiore and Judah Toro, who spearheaded calls for the Jewish people to return to their ancestral homeland and build a new state for themselves, with Jerusalem at its center. By 1882, some 25,000 Jewish immigrants had arrived, which began to significantly alter the religious demographics of the region. With the dawning of the 20th century, the impending collapse of the Ottoman Empire was finally brought about due to the events of the First World War. In 1917, British forces captured Jerusalem from the Ottomans, bringing the city under direct military rule for the following 3 years. However, the British found themselves facing an unforeseen dilemma. In the same year they took Jerusalem, they issued the Balfour Declaration, pledging support for the formal establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. In conjunction to this, they had also previously promised an independent state to the Arabs of the region in exchange for their military assistance against the Ottomans during the war. To address these two competing claims for respective independent states, the British established mandatory Palestine in 1920, and later secured a mandate from the League of Nations to govern the territory in 1922. Over the following 25 years, Jerusalem's population surged from 52,000 to over 165,000, comprising approximately 1/3 Arabs, predominantly Muslim, and 2/3 Jews, who were arriving in ever-increasing numbers from across the global Jewish diaspora. As a result, relations between the Arabs and Jews quickly deteriorated, and the city bore witness to numerous riots during the 1920s. The unrest escalated throughout the 1930s and 1940s, culminating in the United Nations General Assembly's decision on the 29th of November 1947 to partition mandatory Palestine into 2 separate states, one Jewish and one Arab. In a bid to avert any further religious tensions, Jerusalem was to fall under international control as a neutral zone. However, the two-state solution failed to prevent the subsequent conflict it had sought to avoid. Civil war then broke out in Palestine, with Jerusalem becoming a major battleground during the siege of 1947. The fighting only intensified following the withdrawal of British forces in 1948, and the formal establishment of the State of Israel resulted in the conflict widening across the region, with the Arab-Israeli War. Following 9 months of bitter and largely inconclusive fighting, the former British Mandate of Palestine, as well as the city of Jerusalem, was divided among the combatants. The western half of the new city became part of Israel, while the eastern half, including the old city, was occupied by Jordan. This division, however, only entrenched further tensions between the Jews and Arabs, which would set the stage for further conflict between the two groups over the remainder of the 20th century. Despite the repeated efforts of people from all faiths around the world to find a peaceful resolution to the situation in Jerusalem, as well as the wider region of the Middle East as a whole, the centuries-old struggle over who controls the world's holiest city continues to evoke passionate claims from all sides and perpetuates the contentious conflict which, sadly, remains playing out before our very eyes to this day. Thanks again to Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus for sponsoring this video. Be sure to download the game now.
Okay, yeah, I know. We always have to have the
Patrol. These are the stories of the
That video.
Gracie, could you catch the lights for me, please?
Boy, that is a really amazing documentary. No wonder it's like the #1 city of the world.
Yep. Yep. And a lot of facts in there that you're not going to retain all those facts because they went by pretty fast. But we do have our booklet that I've gotten. We're going to be going through some of that this evening. It'll maybe reinforce some of those. But yeah, Jerusalem changed hands so many times over the years that the one group of people who has remained in Jerusalem consistently ever since it was first taken by King David has been the Jews. Mm-hmm. And they've had a continual presence there. So good night, Rich.
40 times.
Okay. Let's see. So let me bring up that document now. I'm gonna go now. Let's share the entire screen. Okay, so this is from that document that I sent you at the beginning. And we're talking about Israel. We talked last time just a little bit about the old city and how he has these 4 quarters. I want to go back to the history of Jerusalem. And before the Israelites conquered it, there are 2 important periods of time. There is the 3rd millennium BC, and at this time the name of the city was Salem. More properly, Shalem. Shalem would be the correct pronunciation, but most people say Salem. About the time of Abraham, roughly 2000 BC, This was the name of it, and we see that name in the Old Testament. It's related to the word shalom for peace, shalom, shalem, and it was ruled by the priest king Melchizedek, whom we meet in the book of Genesis. And Abraham paid tithes to King Melchizedek and worshiped the Lord there. So that's one name. And then by the second millennium, we find another group of people living here, and they are the Jebusites. And their name for the city was Jebus, named after their own tribe. So during the second millennium, about 1400, we find it named Jebus. It was inhabited by this Canaanite tribe, and they were very strong and powerful tribe, largely because they held this fortified city. So that's pre-Israelite. Now, the Israelites, of course, entered in the 1400s under Joshua, but it was not until roughly 1000 BC, that they fully conquered the city of Jebus. Now, it was temporarily conquered even at the time that Joshua entered, and but they lost control of it. So it remained in Canaanite control until 1000 BC. So from 1000 BC all the way up until AD 70, including the entire New Testament, most of the time of the New Testament, we have the Israelite control over the city. That's a long time. Over 1,000 years, the Jews had this as their capital. Now, there was a brief period of time during the Babylonian captivity when they were out of it, but then they came back in. So we can break this long period of time down into several subsections. First of all, the Davidic era. From 1000, David conquered the Jebusite city, making it the capital of the United Kingdom of Israel. Now, the 12 tribes, ever since their beginning, always had divisions among them. And these divisions cropped up from time to time. David was successful in uniting them finally. Before he became king in Jerusalem, he was king in Hebron, and he ruled there for several years. But then he finally brought the rest of the tribes together. And under David's rule and under his son Solomon's rule, you have this united kingdom of Israel. So we come to a second era, and that would be the first temple era from 970 BC to 586 BC. Now, it's referred to as the first temple era. It begins with King Solomon. And as you probably remember from your reading of the Old Testament, David had a desire to build a temple for the Lord. He had built for himself a great palace, and he said, why should I live in a palace when the Lord still stays in a tent? But God told him, no, you're a man of bloodshed. And so because of that, you're not going to build my temple, but your son will. David laid all the plans, collected all the materials, handed the blueprints over to Solomon and said, here, son, build this. That's basically what happened. So 970 BC, we have King Solomon building the temple. This is known as the first temple era commonly. Solomon builds the first Israelite temple, expanding the city walls to the north to encompass Mount Moriah as the site of the temple. When we look at ancient Jerusalem, the ancient city of Melchizedek and the Jebusites, and really under David, it's just the southern spur of that hill. And it's Solomon who goes northward up onto Mount Moriah, where the temple is going to be built. And that's the first real expansion of the city. And it'll go under several other expansions. We talked partly about that last week. Okay, so the first temple era lasts until 586 BC. 586 is important because this is the year that Jerusalem was overtaken by Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar's control over the area actually started a little before this. And the first deportation of Jews to Babylon took place in 606 BC. But usually 586 BC is mentioned because this was a massive deportation, and there was a destruction of the temple and much of the city of Jerusalem at this time. So 970 to 586. 586 brings the first temple era to an end, and we enter into the Babylonian captivity. So we can start the Babylonian captivity in 586. The end of it can be variously dated. Now, Jeremiah, the prophet, says that this captivity is going to last 70 years. So when the beginning and the ending of the Babylonian captivity can be dated is difficult to say. Like I said, the first deportation from Jerusalem was 606. And there were several major and a number of minor deportations. So in Jeremiah's mind, when did the 70 years begin? We don't know. Okay. And when did it come to an end? Well, again, with the return, several Persian rulers allowed Jews to return. And there were several edicts that involved either rebuilding the city or rebuilding the temple or various things. So somewhere in this period of time, 586, 444 BC, we have Jews returning. And within that period, there's a 70-year period that Jeremiah had in mind. And Daniel chapter 9 uses this calculation of 70 years and 70 sabbatical years to calculate how long it will be until the Messiah comes. And Daniel's prophecy in Daniel chapter 9 is remarkable in that dating from this 444 BC and reckoning on a 360-day year, which was the Jewish year reckoning, Daniel's 69 years when he said Messiah would come was fulfilled to the very day of the triumphal entry of Christ. And it's one of the most remarkable prophecies in all of the Bible. We won't take the time to go through all of that in class tonight, but I'll just mention it here. So Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the city and the temple, carried many Israelites from Jerusalem into captivity. As a city, Jerusalem lay in ruins until the Persian rulers permitted the Jews to return and rebuild the temple. So if we have a return, let's use the 444 BC. Some date it to 445, but I think there's a book written by Harold Hohner called Chronological Aspects of the Life of Christ. We have a copy in our library here. It's one of the best chronologies of the life of Christ that I've ever read. He's corrected some of the earlier reckonings of some of the historians. He's using the 444 BC date, which I'm sticking with.
What did you say that the book was?
Harold Hohner, Hoehner. Hoehner, Harold Hohner, Chronological Aspects of the Life of Christ. Not the most exciting title ever used of a book, but it's still a wonderful book. And I forget who the publisher is, but yeah, that's what it is. Okay. Now, from 444 to AD 70, we can refer to this roughly as the era of the Second Temple. So when the Jews start returning under the Persian rulers, they return primarily with a desire to rebuild the temple. That was their first desire. This was what Ezra was concerned about. And when you open the book of Ezra, it starts out with Ezra hearing about the destruction of the temple, how it's laying in ruins, and he's just burdened about this, and he prays and asks God to help him. So he approaches the king and asks for permission to go back to Jerusalem, and he does. And under the leadership of Ezra and men like Joshua and Zerubbabel, they begin to rebuild the temple. And this is now going to be the Second Temple and the Second Temple era. So there was a series of 4 edicts from 3 different Persian rulers that allowed Jews to return from captivity and begin rebuilding the first temple. And then finally the city itself. This is where that 444 BC date comes in importance. Daniel talks about an edict that allows the rebuilding of the city, not just the temple. But when we look at these three different edicts, notice in 539, Cyrus allowed some Jews to return and begin rebuilding the temple. And that edict can be found in 2 Chronicles 36, verses 22 to 33, and again in Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, and it's referred to in Ezra 6, 3 to 5. That's known as the Cyrus Edict. And by the way, Cyrus is actually pronounced Koresh, but we anglicize it into Cyrus. 519 BC, another edict following a suspension of building the temple due to Tattenai's interference. And you can read about Tattenai in Ezra 5, 3 to 17. He was from up in the north. He came down. He was upset that the Jews were rebuilding the temple, and he appealed to the Persian authorities to get the Jews to stop, which they did. But then after that, Darius restored the earlier edict of Cyrus. And Darius's edict is recorded in Ezra chapter 6, verses 1 through 12. And 457 BC, Artaxerxes issued a decree allowing a number of Jews to return with Ezra for further rebuilding and enhancement of the temple. And you can find that edict in Ezra 7, 11 through 26. Now, all of these have to do with rebuilding the temple, not the city. You say, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, the big deal is this is under Persian control, and the Persians are the rulers. And the enemies of the Jews were saying, look, in the past, this city has been a strong and a powerful city. If you allow those Jews to rebuild, they will try to rebel against you. So they can have a temple to worship God in, but not a city that is a political stronghold. Okay, but eventually Artaxerxes says, no, they can build the city. And Artaxerxes issued this decree to Nehemiah, directing him to oversee the rebuilding of the gates and the walls of the city. And that was a strong commitment made by Artaxerxes. And that edict is found in Nehemiah 2, verses 1 through 8. Now, there is, to bring this up to date to our day today, there is, there are problems in Iran. Iran is the modern day equivalent of Persia. Okay? The son of the Shah, who was ousted in the Muslim rebellion, Reza Pahlavi, is living in the United States and is eager to return and oversee the kind of the reconstruction of Iran in modern terms. And he wants to create a Cyrus declaration. He wants to name it after King Cyrus, because Cyrus was the first of the Persian kings to be favorable towards the Jews. So this is going on today. And the Persian people, many of the people of Persia, think very fondly of the Jews because they know of the long history of friendship between Persia/Iran and the nation of Israel, or the Jews. But it's just the minority Muslim control over Iran, the Ayatollahs, the mullahs, that are driven by their Islamist fervor that want to wipe out the Jews. But many of the people in Iran today have very, very sympathetic feelings towards the Jews. So
they're the minority?
The rulers are in the minority. A recent poll found that something like 96% of the population of Iran has sympathetic feelings towards Israel. That's a huge number. So things are happening in Iran that are quite interesting. I've been following the news pretty intently because, there's always the possibility that war could break out and that could impact our tour. Praying that won't happen. But, it's in God's hands, right? But There was a rumor I read about just this morning, by the way, that mass numbers of Iran's military leaders are defecting. Now that's just a rumor at this point, so don't read too much into that. But there are some very, very interesting things taking place right now. So it's possible that when we leave in just under a month, there could be a new era of kind of peace in that region, which prophetically would probably be only a temporary peace, but it could be just the ideal time for our tour. We'll see.
Window.
Yeah, little window. Yeah.
That's who was going to build the ski resort, right?
No, that's
No?
Syria.
Oh, excuse me. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
I don't
Syria.
have my papers.
Yeah, and Iran is much further off.
Okay.
Between them and Iran, you've got all of Iraq in there.
Oh, Iraq.
Syria, Iraq, and then Iran.
Okay.
Yeah, and big, vast mileage. Okay, so we talked about 444. All right, so this was the Second Temple era. Now, Jerusalem remained under the authority of the Persians until the conquest of Persia by Alexander the Great. This is still Second Temple era. So we have Persians ruling. Then we have Alexander the Great. We have a Greek rule over that period of time, over that portion of the land. And we saw that. It went by rather rapidly in the video we saw earlier. But this is all taking place now during the intertestamental period. Between the end of the Old Testament, during those 400 years before the New Testament opens. So we have the Persian era coming to an end. We have a whole period of Greek rule. And then we have the Hellenistic period. This is the period Alexander the Great. This is Greek. So Alexander's conquest of this part is 332 BC. And the Greeks remain in control of this area until 63. Now it breaks up. The Greek Empire breaks up into four sections. But it's still Greek until 63 BC. It's not till 63 that the Romans come in. But Jesus, in his Olivet Discourse, said that Jerusalem will be trampled under the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. When he used that expression, the times of the Gentiles, he was talking about a period of time when Jerusalem, and in particular, Temple Mount, are under Gentile control. This begins with the Babylonian captivity. Beginning with Babylonian captivity, you have Babylon in control of Jerusalem, the Temple Mount. Then the Persians are in control. You say, wait a minute, didn't you say that the Jews rebuilt? Yes, they built it, but they had a building permit from Persia. So they were only doing so by the permission of Persia. Alexander the Great comes in. And an amazing thing with Alexander the Great, he's going everywhere conquering and destroying these cities. And when Alexander came to Jerusalem, Josephus records this account. The night before he was going to move against Jerusalem and conquer it, Alexander has this dream. And in his dream, as he's approaching the city, the priests, the Jewish priests, come out through the gate and greet him and usher him into the city. So the next day, when Alexander and his armies were coming up to Jerusalem, that very thing happened. And the high priest and the rest of the priests came out of the city gate. They met Alexander, ushered him into the city. Alexander worships God in the Jewish temple and grants the Jews complete freedom of religion. And he doesn't destroy their city. But, of course, he's the king. And so Jerusalem still is under the control of Gentiles. This is the times of the Gentiles. So the Hellenistic period, we have Alexander's years, 332 to 312. Under that, after that, the Ptolemies are in control of Jerusalem from 312 to 198. And then the Seleucids from the north come in and control it from 198 to 167. And it's from the Seleucid line that we have Antiochus Epiphanes, who desecrates the temple. And then the Maccabees rise up and rebel and eventually regain the city and purify the temple, which is celebrated every year at Hanukkah, the festival of dedication. That's taking place during the Seleucid rule. And this period comes to a close when the Maccabees defeat the armies of the anti-Semitic Antiochus Epiphanes, regain control of Jerusalem. And then we have this brief period of time that is just kind of an exception to everything else during this long history of the times of the Gentiles, when you have the Hasmoneans in control. They actually had a Jewish political entity in control of it from 167 to 63 BC for just roughly 100 years. And the descendants of the Maccabees were so adored by the Jewish people, they made them kings. Problem with that biblically is that the kings must always come from the tribe of Judah. But the Maccabees were from the priestly tribe, which is Levi. So biblically, they should never have been kings. So they were not God-appointed kings. And quite frankly, the Hasmoneans were really terrible kings. They were tyrannical. They oppressed people. Under the Hasmoneans, during the late Hasmonean rule, you had the rise of a group known as the Pharisees. And the Pharisees were insistent on maintaining the teachings of the Bible, which the Hasmoneans were violating. So when we read the New Testament, we read about the Pharisees, we know they're the bad guys. But back in these times, the Pharisees were actually the good guys. They were the Bible believers. They were insistent. And there were thousands of Pharisees who were put to death by the Hasmoneans. So this is why you have this hatred between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Sadducees were descended from the Hasmoneans. We'll come. Herod the Great is the next one during the Roman period. Herod the Great comes in. Herod gets from Rome permission to be called the King of the Jews. And he has permission from Caesar to rule as a king under the authority of Rome over this area known as Judea. So, of course, the Hasmoneans didn't like that very well, but Herod had all of the authority of Rome behind him, so he basically dethroned the Hasmoneans. So, but the Hasmoneans were still a respected, high-class entity in Israel among the Jews. And so they were looked up to and respected by many Jews, but they were hated by the Pharisees, and the hatred was mutual between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they just did not get along with each other. But they finally united, of course, when it came to what shall we do with Jesus, and they got together on that and condemned him to death. But they didn't like each other, and Herod didn't like either of those groups either. So you've got lots of tension in the air when the Savior arrives on earth. But that's coming back here. So the Hasmoneans then take over, and that brings us up to the Roman period. And so the Roman period is going to begin with 63 BC. Now we're getting up awfully close to the time of the coming of Christ. Herod the Great, an Idumean, which is the same as an Edomite. And you might remember the Edomites were the ancient enemies of Israel. There were several prophets who spoke quite harshly about the Edomites. Wrests control of Israel from the Hasmoneans, and in 40 BC succeeds in being named King of the Jews by the Roman Senate. Under Herod's rule, Jerusalem expands northward. Now, Herod was a madman. He was crazy as they come. And he was also quite evil. Those of us who read our Bibles, of course, know that he had all the children around Bethlehem from 2 years old and under put to death just because he was scared of this one who was supposed to be king of the Jews. But he had many people put to death, many of his own family members, because he was just paranoid that somebody was going to take his kingship away from him. So he was crazy, but he was also brilliant. And one of the things that made him brilliant is that he was a brilliant builder. And when we are in Israel, you will see all over the land of Israel remnants of Herod's building projects. So Herod built up Masada. We'll talk about that. He built aqueduct. We already talked about the aqueduct that he built to bring water down to Caesarea Maritima. He built up the temple and even the whole Temple Mount. He had extensive building projects in and around Jerusalem, and archaeological remains of many of these building projects are still quite visible today. Well, that's Herod the Great, and he really kicks off this Roman period from 63 to AD 70. So, dispersion, AD 70 to 1948. With the destruction of the temple in 70, the Jews are forced out of Jerusalem. Now, not all of the Jews left. There were some Jews who remained, but the important Jews, the powerful Jews, anybody that was a threat or perceived as a threat to Rome, was forced out of the city in the year 70. Now, the period of pagan Roman domination of Jerusalem will begin in 70 and extend up until 324. So it's a fairly long period of time. So this is pagan Roman rule. In AD 70, Jerusalem destroyed by the Roman armies, and the leader of those armies was the general Titus. Titus will later become an emperor, but he led the armies in AD 70. That's one of your questions on your review sheet. Hint, hint to our two credit students. In AD 175, Jerusalem was renamed Aelia Capitolina. There's another name. So we had Salem, we had Jebus, we had Jerusalem, now Aelia Capitolina, named after the Capitoline gods of Rome. It was dedicated to those pagan gods. So Judea at this time was renamed Palestine. The name Palestine before this was never a name for that land. Formerly, the Greeks used the name Palestine to refer to the little strip of land that was controlled by the Philistines, which today we think of as the Gaza Strip. But it was Emperor Hadrian who actually oversaw this renaming of Aelia Capitolina and of Palestine. These were intended to be insults to the Jews. So the Temple Mount has temples at this time erected for the Roman gods Juno and Minerva, and in town another one dedicated to Jupiter. These are the Capitoline gods, giving the name Aelia Capitolina. So this is, again, the emperor here is Hadrian, and he is the one responsible. This is because there was a second Jewish revolt that took place around the 130s, mid to late 130s. And Rome had to come against the second Jewish revolt and finally put it down. That revolt, by the way, was led by a man named Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba is Aramaic for son of the stars. So his reasoning was, well, look, the Maccabees got rid of the Greeks, and so God will do that again, and through us we'll be able to get rid of these Romans. But he didn't have the hand of God with him, and his rebellion was put down. Now, in 324, we enter the first Byzantine period. It's still Roman control, but Rome undergoes a big change. And that change takes place with Emperor Constantine. And Constantine gives some kind of allegiance to Christianity. Constantine's mother was a Christian. His father was a pagan Roman. Constantine did receive Christian baptism on his deathbed. But in 313, Constantine issued an edict at Milan called the Edict of Milan, granting toleration to Christianity. Up until that time, Christianity had been officially persecuted by the Romans. But with Constantine, you have this change of attitude, and Rome becomes increasingly, quote, Christian, unquote. So we have this Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire is the Roman Empire, but it's the Roman Empire that now has been transformed into a Christian Roman Empire. When we say Christian, that doesn't mean that there was, necessarily people were born again or, were Bible believers like you and I think. But this was a kind of a formal type of Christianity. And eventually Roman citizens were required to give their allegiance to the Christian faith if they were Roman citizens under the Byzantine Empire. And there was both good and bad that took place, and we're not going to get into all that here. But many churches were built over Christian sites during this Byzantine era. Our video that we watched talked about the building of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre at this time, and there were lots of other Byzantine churches. The peak of the Christian Byzantine development is reached during the reign of Emperor Justinian, 527 to 565. So this period of time, it lasted quite a while until they were overthrown by the Muslims. We'll have to talk about the Muslim influence in Jerusalem, but we're going to do that after a break because we've all been sitting for a pretty long time. Are there any questions before we break? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, hold on just a second. Rich has a question first.
That Herod was an Edomite. Was that from the land that we now know as Iran?
No. So Edom was across the Jordan River down by the Dead Sea. But at the time of the New Testament, there were Edomites who were settled in various places. Herod actually comes from Ashkelon. And Herod was intrigued with the Jewish people. And he fell in love with a Jewish lady, Mariamne, and married her, had another wife put to death. There's just all kinds of sordid, horrible stories. I can't even tell, but he's from Ashkelon, but he was his background was Edomian. Yeah. Now somebody online had a question.
Yes. Could you provide us with the launch for that video that you showed us?
Oh yeah. So that video, you can find it on YouTube. It's
You said the History Channel.
yeah, it's the History Channel, and it's called, I think, the Entire History of Jerusalem is the name of it. Let me see if I've.
The subtitle was Jerusalem, the world's holiest city. That's what they put up there on that.
That's what they put up there, Jerusalem, the world's holiest city.
Uh-huh.
If you search for Jerusalem and look for the History Channel, I'm sure you'll find it.
Okay.
Yeah.
You didn't mention Herod Antipas.
No, Herod Antipas comes after Herod the Great, but kind of passed over him. When Herod died, his kingdom was divided among his sons, and they're called tetrarchs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that you'd think that would be 4 rulers, tetra and archi, but there were 3 of them, and Herod Antipas was one of them. He was the one who was ruling in Judea when the Holy Family returned from Egypt, and
He was also the Herod that Christ met.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break, and it's 7:25 right now. We'll come back at 7:35.
Oh, Julie, the other day, I said I was so, it was so fun to see, all those things we talked about recognize it.
Dr. Gunn?
Yep.
So do you know why they were called tetrarchs?
I don't know. There might have been 4 at one time, and maybe one met an untimely death, or I'm not sure about that. But it does mean 4 rulers. It might have been just a common term by that time of a kingdom that gets subdivided into parts. and it might have gone back to some earlier period of time when there were 4. I'm just not sure.
So I noticed it on that flight over where science.
Yeah, that's what it says.
In your past experience, was there any rotation within our
Yeah,
group?
it's in the text box. I didn't look. I just,
Sure. So like,
yeah.
man, I have no idea what my brother's procedure is gonna be, and I don't need to sit with them.
Chair out.
What
Sorry.
was appropriate, whether
Yeah, I
Wanna
think
stay in
you know,
this-
once we're in the air, people want to switch around. I don't think that's a problem. People within our group.
Interesting concept there. You just choose the equip, he equips the chips. Things that we want.
Great.
Never do that with pencil, let alone chalk on
I
a
know,
chalkboard.
I know, and it's been there the whole time. So no one has
Yeah,
touched
I
it.
know. I would be too scared to erase it now.
No.
So do you two go to the same church?
Mhm.
Okay, which is that?
Valley Christian or VC.
VCF. Okay,
Mhm.
okay, yeah,
Mhm.
familiar with it.
Yeah.
Very nice.
They changed a couple of years ago.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
I'm
I
an
call
old
it
school.
both.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
people
People say what church on Sea Valley, and they're like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's VCF.
Right.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Halfway used to be neighborhood.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
All it's all.
Well,
All
it is.
confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes
Yeah.
Israel with
Yeah.
its 4 different names or.
Well, that's true, but that's why, I mean, at least Arston has the same initials,
Yes,
you know,
true.
Chris. It's like, I talked to somebody the other day and I said Central Valley.
Oh, I remember Central Valley, yeah.
And she looked at me and she goes, I don't know where that is. And I said,
Yeah, that's it.
well, Shasta Lake is that big hole out there with the water in it. So I've never agreed with that being the name of the town.
I know. I can never keep it straight. One's Shasta Lake, the other's city, and the other's Lake Shasta. I think Lake Shasta is the actual body of
Right,
water.
right.
Yeah.
Shasta Lake's the name of the city. I always get them confused.
Well, everything in like a 50-mile radius is named Shasta something.
Something.
Oh, I
Right,
know.
right.
Sure. A little creative
Sure,
or something
yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Let's try it again, but no.
Dr. Dunn is the last day on our itinerary is free.
Yes.
Is that set in stone?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Make me an appointment that way. And have you ever discovered somewhere to go for music and worship?
there are places. You mean like a church or something?
Well, or, you know, in Hawaii, you can pay to go to a luau.
oh,
You know, I mean, is there
yeah.
a place? Somebody should be an entrepreneur and do that, because I think they.
Well, if they have something like that, there'd probably be like in the hotel, there'd be like different activities you can,
Mhm.
Well,
like a
sometimes
2 hour.
there are
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
There are
Mhm.
things in
Is
the
that kind of like,
hotels.
that's how you go to
sometimes.
a luau
I've-
usually.
Yeah, I looked up on the website yesterday that was called Fun in Israel or something. But they're big,
That much room inside of.
big events, you know,
Yeah.
balloons.
When we were last time we were at the hotel at the Dead Sea, there was quite a bit of Israeli entertainment going on there in the night, and you could attend that, pick up some local Jewish music,
You had acrobat.
acrobats, yeah,
That would be fun.
acrobats, music and stuff. One year, actually, there was a whole show put on at the YMCA we went to, and that was really, really good. But that isn't going on anymore. At least it wasn't last time I was there. So there may be some things. We'll have to ask our tour guide.
Mhm.
He can recommend some things.
Yeah, I would love that. That's my heart. Worship is my thing, and
Yeah.
I would love that. I asked a guy who lived there for a year, and he said, Teresa, the second you step off of that plane, you're going to be worshiping. And
I know. Well, that's absolutely true.
yeah. Not quite what I had in mind, but yeah.
Yeah, and we'll try to have our own little church service on Sunday when we're there. Stop somewhere and we'll have a worship service. But we're going to be keeping pretty busy most of the time.
Yeah.
But you're right. The free day is the time to find something like that.
Or when you
Lots
get
of
back to the
things you can-
hotel at night, if it's not too
Be
late.
something. Yeah.
If it's not too
Yeah.
late.
Well, it's not supposed to be because we're there for dinner every night.
What time does dinner kind of happen? I know different countries do it later or earlier.
They schedule it for us.
It seems to me like it was usually about 7.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
In Spain, they eat at like 10 p.m. So it's like, oh,
Oh, wow.
could be completely different. You never know. Okay.
Usually it's like 3 hours or something that you have to.
Yeah.
Because it's
To get down there.
Mhm.
The first day that we are there, where we arrive at, 3 in the morning,
Mhm.
is the camel trip, and I think the Sea of Galilee. Is that the
No,
right?
I think it's the
it'll
Dead
be
Sea.
The Dead Sea.
Dead Sea,
Yeah. And so I'm wondering, can you get that changed, or do we suffer, or
You don't have to get on the camel.
but I
No.
want to. See, that's the
Yeah.
problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah.
You're going to be too tired?
Well,
Be
that first
jet lagged?
day, we'll see what the guide has planned for that day. But yeah, we're flexible.
Okay. I personally exist on about 4 hours of sleep a night, so it's not going to bother me. But
But
I could do it
jet lag
tired.
is a real thing in
It
Israel
is.
because we're based on the exact opposite side of the planet, so
Right.
it's as far out of sync as you can get,
Mhm.
pretty much. So I would recommend that you get some melatonin
Mm.
and you start, and I would start about a week before we depart, kind of adjusting your sleep.
Mhm.
Get going either later
Mhm.
or earlier, one way or the other, to add maybe a couple, 3 hours difference to your sleep pattern. And then on the flight over, if you can try to adjust to Israeli time on the airplane
Mhm. Mhm.
and try to figure out, when is bedtime in Israel, and about that time, make sure you're going to sleep, and that's when the melatonin might come in handy.
Mhm.
And then when we're there, when a half hour before bedtime, take a melatonin
Yeah.
and see if that helps you.
That layover in Germany is what's killing us.
Yeah.
yeah,
That
there's
takes a
one.
bite out of our schedule, but we can only do it there.
We
Bites
do it, yeah.
can get us. So
I was wondering about water. Does the bus supply us with filtered water? I don't usually drink tap water.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So
there'll be bottles, there'll be
Mhm.
bottles of water that you can purchase on the bus.
on the bus.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Wi-Fi.
And free Wi-Fi on the bus, yeah. But
So-
yeah, there'll be water and yeah, it's good. I don't know. I've had the tap water there and never had a problem.
Okay.
But there's bottled water everywhere.
Everywhere.
You
And
can
just
get
buy
bottled
it, just
water.
like in Europe, you can just buy
The
it.
one place where you really want to be careful of the tap water is down at the Dead Sea. But most of Israel, has desalinated water that is good, safe drinking water. They pipe through.
Even when we go into hotels, we drink,
Yeah.
we take bottled water
Yeah.
with us.
Yeah, you can find.
So same at like when we arrive at the Dead Sea, we'll be able to bring it off the bus. We can buy it on the bus before we
Mhm.
get to the hotel.
Yeah.
Take it with us.
Yeah, and in
They'll
all the
probably have it
hotels
in
you
the
can buy
hotel,
bottled
too.
water too.
Okay, okay. I'm just not used to not having my own wheels. Usually we can go to the grocery store
Mhm.
I know.
or whatever.
Yep, you're gonna be a little limited that way.
Yeah.
But we're gonna be so busy you won't even
Yeah,
realize
yeah,
it.
the hotels sell it, that's good.
Well, we just want to be hydrated, that's all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's on the
you
plane.
want to stay hydrated for sure.
Well, not on the plane. You have to go
Before.
through, you have to go
Yeah,
through,
and
and then you can
TSA,
go up to get
yeah,
on the
plane,
plane.
yeah, the whole shebang.
Or you can freeze it. You can take it if it's ice.
All right, folks, we are back. We are ready to start rolling. So let me share the screen again. So the Byzantine period was now Christianized Rome in control. And you'll notice that we have here the first Byzantine period. By implication, there's a second Byzantine period coming up. And those two Byzantine periods were interrupted briefly by a Persian period. So from the east, Persians came in. They took control of Jerusalem from 614 to 629. Now, it's not a very long period of time, but it was enough time for them to do some real damage. And many of the Christian churches were destroyed. Now, we talked about the relationship between Persia and the Jews. Go back to the time of Cyrus, we have a great friendship. Even during this Persian period, they didn't think too fondly of the Christians, but they allowed Jews to return. So this again is part of this Persia/Iran relationship with the Jewish people that we're trying to pay attention to. But that only lasted to 629. In 629, the Byzantines once again took control of Jerusalem. We have a second Byzantine period from 629 to 638. Now, at this time, in the 600s, there is a religious movement taking place down in the Arabian Peninsula. So a young man by the name of Muhammad has visions, and he believes that he is called by God to rescue the Arabian people from their idolatry. And so he calls them to follow his monotheistic religion. Prior to that, they had worshipped a sun god and a moon goddess and her daughters, and there was a pre-Islamic Arabic religion. But Muhammad changed all that. And after he conquered the Arabian Peninsula, he began to move northward up towards Jerusalem and westward across North Africa. And eventually, he will come to dominate all of North Africa, and he will move northward, taking all of Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, Galilee, up into Lebanon. And this begins then to threaten even the whole Byzantine Empire. But he pushes the Byzantines out of Jerusalem. So as far as Jerusalem is concerned, then we have this second Byzantine period coming to an end in 638. So the first Muslim period from 638 to 1099. And a number of things take place during this period of time, and you'll see evidence of this all over the place in Jerusalem. So the first Muslims really to gain control are the Umayyads. The Umayyads reigned from 638 to 750. And it's at this time that the Dome of the Rock is built and Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, the Dome of the Rock is not a mosque. A lot of people think that. It's a memorial building. Al-Aqsa Mosque is at the southern end of the Temple Mount. It's a long, rectangular shaped building. And that's the place where they say Muhammad traveled in his night visit to the farthest mosque. There's a lot of debate over what that farthest mosque was. It probably was not, in fact, Jerusalem, but was somewhere down in the northern end of the Arabian Peninsula. But the tradition among the Muslims has been for a long time that Muhammad visited Jerusalem, and Al-Aqsa Mosque commemorates that. But this is not coming about until sometime later. But Al-Aqsa Mosque gets built. The Umayyads have it till 750. After them, the Abbasids, another Muslim group, conquers it. They are replaced by the Fatimids, and they are replaced by the Seljuk Turks. Now, these are all Muslim groups, but they're different groups from different areas. Some are from Egypt, some are from Arabia, some are from Asia Minor, and some are from further to the east. And they're all fighting against each other. And this actually has been the history of the people that we commonly refer to as Arabs. They've just had a continual history of infighting amongst themselves, and sometimes some horrible stories of the wars they fought against each other. But Jerusalem just changes hands again and again and again and again. But these are all Arab groups. And the last one, the Seljuk Turks here, have it until 1099. Now, a lot of time has transpired. In 1099, we have the first Crusader period. Now, the Crusades are infamous. And today in schools, people are taught about these horrible Crusaders that just went and murdered people. And they're made out to be the worst people on the face of the earth. And there were some atrocities committed by the Crusaders. No doubt about that. But the intention of the Crusaders was to rescue the Holy Land from these Muslims who were not allowing Christians to visit the holy places. For a while, Christians were traveling to the Holy Land, no problem. And then they started being taxed, and then they started being harassed, and then some of them were being put to death. And so the report got back to Western Europe, and they said, we got to do something about this. And the whole Crusader idea started with Christian pilgrims who wanted to go to the Holy Land, and they would hire basically bodyguards to come with them, armed accomplices. So they would go and they would have their bodyguards. Sometimes battles were fought. Eventually, the Pope saw that there was a great need, and as we saw in the video, it mentioned this, that the Eastern Orthodox Church appealed to the Western Roman Catholic Church for aid in securing the security of these Christian pilgrims. This was the whole idea behind the Crusades. So they got up these armed groups, and what started out as, I think what was, we could all probably agree was a good idea, developed into something that wasn't so good. And there were some atrocities. Among other atrocities, by the way, many of the Crusaders in Western Europe, before they set out for the Holy Land, would practice their military skills by wiping out the villages of Jews. So there was a lot of anti-Semitic feeling among European Roman Catholics. And this comes from their replacement theology. They believed the Jews were a cursed race for having rejected the Messiah, and that God was done with them, and they just thought they were doing God a favor by putting Jews to death.
Well, right
So,
there still. I
yeah,
have a friend who believes that.
I know. Yeah, isn't that wild? I don't know how you can be a Bible believer and think
Yeah.
that, but
They don't study their Bibles, they just listen to the priest.
Well,
That's where they get their ideas.
yeah. So anyway, that's the background. So the Crusaders move in, and from 1099 to 1187, they actually have what was called the Kingdom of Jerusalem. They conquered most of the Holy Land. They established a kingdom with its capital in the city of Jerusalem. And this is the first Crusader period. Now, there was a second Muslim period. The Crusaders were conquered in 1187. And then, no, this is like a repeat of that first Muslim period. We start with the Ayyubids, and then the Mamluks, and then the Ottomans. Now, the most recent is now the Ottoman Turks from 1514 to 1917. Now, look at that date, 1917. That is pretty recent. And if you know your history, you know 1917, we're talking about the conclusion of World War I. So in World War I, the Ottomans were allied with Germany. And when the Germans were defeated, so were the Ottomans. And with the defeat of the Ottoman Turks, you have a mandate to govern land that they called Palestine by this time by the British. It's called the British Mandate. But let's come back before we get to the British Mandate to the Ottoman Turks during this long period of time. The Turkish leader that conquered the Mamluks, who I think were Egyptian, was named Suleiman the Magnificent. So we talked last week about the old city walls and how the old city walls weren't really the walls around the old city of Jerusalem. These walls were built by Suleiman. Suleiman the Magnificent built what we see today as the old city walls. They date to his. So that's still, I mean, that's a long time ago. We're talking about 1514 and a few years after that, but not ancient in terms of this ancient land. So the old city walls, Suleiman the Magnificent. Now, in 1917, you have the fall of the Ottoman Empire and then the coming in of the British Mandate. So the League of Nations essentially assigned various parts of the old Ottoman Empire to be controlled either by the British or the French. And most of the nations of that part of the world today were actually created after World War I by either the British or the French. If you go to Lebanon today, you'll find a lot of French infrastructure because that was part of the French mandate. Syria also, I think, was French. Egypt and Israel and Iraq, these were all part of the British mandate. And so if you visit those nations today, you know, a lot of people think, well, Israel's a modern nation and all these Arab nations have been there forever. Well, these Arab nations, most of them are barely any older than Israel itself, as far as a modern nation is concerned. But the British Mandate, we had, at the conclusion of World War I, League of Nations divided control of most of the Middle Eastern lands between Britain and France. Britain was given a mandate for Palestine. Now, Britain's official position that the Jews should have a homeland in Palestine, this is one of the review questions for tonight, is contained in numerous documents, but most notably the Balfour Declaration. So Lord Balfour was a British official, and he was entrusted with the responsibility of developing Britain's diplomatic position towards the mandate. There was a lot of friendly attitudes towards the Jews in Britain at this time. And it was based on essentially a strong commitment to the teaching of the Bible. Many of the British churches at this time were committed to the idea that the Jews should return to their home, their ancient homeland. And Lord Balfour was a dedicated Christian man, and he developed this, and it was officially adopted as the position of the British. Now, things changed in Britain, and around this time, the Anglican Church was undergoing some real modernization theologically. And in the next couple of generations after Balfour, some strongly anti-Semitic attitudes were beginning to gain hold among the British churches. And but I think it was providential that Lord Balfour was where he was when he was to enunciate this principle. So the Balfour Declaration says the Jews should have a homeland in Palestine. Now, one important thing to keep in mind about the word Palestine, remember it was Hadrian who gave it that name. He gave it that name as an insult to the Jews. Palestine stands for Philistines. And so that was were the ancient enemies of Israel. Palestine came to stand for generally that whole region. And it was applied by the time of the Balfour Declaration. Palestine stood for both sides of the Jordan River. Today, what we think of as Israel, the West Bank, and the country of Jordan. All of that was Palestine. So when Balfour said that the Jews should have a homeland in Palestine, there have been many attempts to try to interpret what he meant by that. Did he mean that the Jews should have all of Palestine as a homeland? If so, why did he say in Palestine? So reading in Palestine, many have thought, well, part of Palestine would be for the Jews and another part for the Arabs. Well, okay, so what Britain did was they gave the Arabs one part of Palestine that was on the east side of the Jordan River, and it was named Jordan. So that would lead people to think that, well, on the west side of the Jordan River, the ancient state of Israel, that should be the homeland for the Jews. But not everybody agreed on that. And especially, of course, the Arabs that lived there didn't like that. And so the Brits never did officially give the Jews a nation. They just kind of sat on it. They tried to maintain peace as much as they could, but there were conflicts that arose between the Jews and the Arabs on the west side of the Jordan River that just continued to fester and blow up and cause problems. And while Britain was waiting to try to figure out what to do, World War II came. So we have 1948, the conclusion of World War II. 1947, the League of Nations is no longer around and is replaced by a new international body called the United Nations. One of the very first things the United Nations took up was to solve this problem of what to do with the west side of the Jordan River. What the Brits couldn't accomplish, let's finally solve this. So they debated that, they argued, they tried to come up with something, and they said, okay, we're going to split up the west side between the Jews and the Arabs. And so you have what's called the Partition Plan of 1947. And the Partition Plan was voted on in the United Nations, and it passed. The Jewish people said yes, even though it wasn't all that they wanted. They only had really a small portion of that side of Palestine. They said, we'll take it. The Arabs said no. And the Arabs immediately went to war against the Jews in 1948. And they said, we're going to push the Jews off into the Mediterranean, and then we'll have the whole thing. And that was the whole background for the first major war that the modern state of Israel fought. But by a miracle of God, the Jews won. Now, for the most part, the Jews at this time were composed of poor Jews who were living in the land of Israel, plus stragglers who had survived the Holocaust and somehow made their way back to Israel. And by all odds, humanly speaking, the Jews shouldn't have lasted a day. The Arabs were armed with modern weaponry. They had tanks, they had machine guns, they had powerful armies, well-trained armies, and the Jews were just this ragtag band of people. But the Jews managed to fight successfully, and they even gained a corridor that hadn't been part of the partition plan, leading them up to Jerusalem. Now they weren't able to conquer the old city of Jerusalem, but they got up to Jerusalem and had what's known as Western Jerusalem. So there was a no man's land between the Jewish side and the Arab side. The Jordanians actually at that time came into the old city of Jerusalem, and the Jordanians occupied Jerusalem, and actually most of that what we call the West Bank. Well, people of today call the Jewish the occupiers, and they forget the fact that Jordanians actually were occupiers. And the Jews were fighting against the Jordanians on land that had been said should be not part of the country of Jordan, but should be given to the Jews, to the Arabs living in the land. So there's a lot of misinformation that's floating around there about the Palestinians, who they are, and who control the land, and so forth. But let's pick up the story here. We stopped here at point 2. Tensions developed between the Jews and the Arabs. We talked about that, resulting in some important Arab leaders siding with Hitler during World War II. Modern Israel, 1948 to the present. So, yeah, on May 15th, 1947, this is the date of the appointing of a committee, what was called UNSCOP, to resolve the growing conflicts. On August 31st, 1947, the UN adopted a plan proposed by this committee for the partition of Palestine east of the Jordan River into 2 states. This should say west of the Jordan River. That's my misprint. One a Jewish state and the other an Arab state. November 29th, 1947 is the date that they passed that. Jerusalem now and its environs were supposed to remain under international control. Now, this was the UN decision. So Jerusalem was not going to be for the Jews. It wasn't going to be for the Arabs. It was going to be under UN control, at least until a final settlement could be made. But as I said, Jordan came in and occupied Jerusalem, made it theirs, until the Jordanians were finally pushed out in 1967. Okay, so immediately we had a war. 1948, one of the first, really the first official Arab-Israeli war. So as soon as the new state of Israel was in place, it was attacked by the armies of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. 5 strong countries with well-trained armies. The newly formed Israel Defense Forces succeeded in forcing these armies to a ceasefire. Newly acquired territory held by Israel included the west half of modern Jerusalem, while eastern Jerusalem remained under Jordanian control. And that's the first of the Arab-Israeli wars. Now, between 1948 and 1967, they talk about a war of attrition. So there were constant kind of border skirmishes. But the Arabs kept trying to pick away at the Jewish people, trying to discourage them, trying to get them to think, well, it's not worth our while to try to defend this country. But things didn't blow up into full-fledged war until 1967. 1967 was the famous 6 Days War. In 1967, Israel facing a growing military threat by Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq. They had intelligence telling them that they were getting together, planning a major all-out assault on the country. So Israel launched a preemptive military strike against Egypt in early June. And what they did was they went in and they basically bombed and took out all of the Egyptian Air Force, which took away their ability to strike really significantly. The combined Arab armies immediately began to invade Israel. And so they did invade overland. But the short-lived war is sometimes referred to as the 6 Days War. Territory eventually was gained by Israel, and it's at this time that they gained eastern Jerusalem and the old city, and they gained access to the Temple Mount. And this was a huge success for the Jews. They never thought they were going to be able to take Jerusalem, but the forces that were sent there managed to get through the gates, get in, and overtake the city. They were surprised at how easy it was. And when they got to the Western Wall, they blew the shofar, and they gave out the message to the army, the Temple Mount is in our hands. And it's a tremendous moment in Israeli history.
It was really exciting. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, they said this is during our lifetimes.
We're pretty excited.
Yeah.
That happened.
It was
We had
amazing.
a lot of jokes. Egyptian tanks and Israeli tanks, and that the Egyptians have 1 year forward and 3 years.
Yeah, 3 years.
All that.
There are some great stories that come from the 6 Days War, and then later from the 73, I think, when they gained the Golan Heights. But so we're not going to dwell on that this time. I want to get into, this brings us up pretty much to modern times. As far as biblical references to Jerusalem are concerned, Jerusalem is referred to 810 times in the Bible. That's a lot. The other names, Jebus is referred to 5 times. So 810 is too many to list them all here, but 5 times we can do. So Joshua 18:28, Joshua 19:10 and 11, and 1 Chronicles 11 verses 4 and 5. We have Jebus. Salem, there are 4 references. We find that in Genesis 14:18, in Psalm 76:2, and in Hebrews 7:1 and 2. That's Salem, or better, Shalem. And then another name is Zion. Zion is actually the name of that mountain, Mount Zion. And the city of Jerusalem was built on the southern spur of Mount Zion. The Temple Mount is on the height of Mount Zion. And Zion occurs 163 times in the Bible. So these are tremendous names that we encounter. Some of the things to see in Jerusalem today, in the Mall City, which is on the west side of Jerusalem, outside of the old city walls. This is what Israel held prior to 1967. There is the Knesset, that's Israel's parliament building. So Israel has a parliamentary form of government. They have many, many, many political parties. It's not like here where everybody's either a Republican or a Democrat, and maybe a few that are some other thing. There are a whole bunch of little parties, and when they form a government, they have to form a coalition. So whoever has the strongest party is given a mandate by the president to form a government. So they have to go out and consult with other groups. If they can get everybody together to agree on a party platform, then they have the government. And their leader is the prime minister. So it's a little different than what we have here in America with 2 houses of Congress and a president and Supreme Court. But it's a parliamentary. But the name of it is the Knesset. Knesset. Yad Vashem. And we'll visit Yad Vashem. This is Israel's Holocaust Memorial Museum, and it's an amazing experience to visit this. Yad Vashem means literally a hand and a name, but Yad means a hand, and it also means a memorial, the memorial of a name, and this stands for the names of all the 6 million Jews that died during the Holocaust. It's a memorial for the names of all those that perished. There at Yad Vashem is the Avenue of the Righteous Gentiles. They have a whole walkway there where righteous Gentiles who protected Jews during the Holocaust have a tree and a little plaque with their name on it and what they accomplished. And that's a neat thing to see. There is also in Jerusalem, in the modern city, a scale model of the 1st century Jerusalem. And that's right outside of where the Dead Sea Scrolls Museum is. But this whole scale model is a marvelous thing to walk around and to see, and it kind of gives you a real feel for what 1st century Jerusalem was like. Okay, the Shrine of the Book is the museum where the Dead Sea Scrolls are housed, and we'll get to go there. The Garden Tomb is definitely worth seeing. And that is also outside of the old city walls, but not very far outside. And from where our hotel in Jerusalem is, when you walk from our hotel to the old city, you go right past the Garden Tomb. But we'll stop there. We'll probably have communion there at the Garden Tomb. Gordon's Calvary is right there by the Garden Tomb. It's an alternate site for Calvary, the site of the crucifixion, alternate to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So and we can talk about the pluses and minuses about that later. The menorah, this is the menorah you were showing me the picture of. Okay. So this menorah, well, there's actually 2. There's that menorah. I think this is probably a reference to the menorah that's at the Knesset. There is a gigantic menorah that was donated by Great Britain. And I think it's bronze, and it has various symbols on it depicting the history of Israel. And that's quite a sight to see. Mount Scopus, the site of the city of Nob, which you read about in the Bible, where a slaughter of priests took place.
Is there a hospital up there?
Yes, there is. And then the Mount of Olives is also outside of the city walls, goes to the east of it. We talked about that last week. Now, within the city, within the old city, we have, of course, the Western Wall. People used to call it the Wailing Wall. Sometimes people still call it that today, but they prefer to really call it the Western Wall. It was called the Wailing Wall during the Middle Ages, when the Jews were only allowed to go there. And they knew the side of the temple was up above that. And so because they couldn't go up to the holy site, they would wail, they would cry and weep at this Western Wall. It was the Western retaining wall of the Temple Mount. But the Western Wall is still a popular site for Jews and for tourists. When boys have their bar mitzvah, that's the place they want to have it, is at the Western Wall.
So it is not the temple wall.
No, it's just it's a retaining wall holding up the plaza for the Temple Mount. The whole temple itself was destroyed. Yeah. So a lot of people talk about that. They say, well, you know, when Jesus talked about the destruction of the temple, this can't be the side of the temple because the wall is still there. But this is not the wall of the temple.
Yeah, same thing.
Then the Temple Mount itself, and Lord willing, we'll get to go up on the Temple Mount. We're scheduled to. The Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrows. This was the traditional path that Jesus took when he was on his way to be crucified. Most of that probably is not the actual route, but a portion of it probably is. So we'll get to see the Via Dolorosa. It's all marked very clearly. Church of the Holy Sepulchre is such an interesting thing. So no one church owns the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Its ownership is shared by the Greek Orthodox Church, the Armenian Apostolic Church, and the Roman Catholic Church. And then other lesser responsibilities belong to the Coptic Orthodox Church, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and the Syriac Orthodox Church. Now, all of these different Christian groups can't get along together. And from time to time, even fistfights break out among the priests of these different groups because they can't agree on who has the right to be there and worship at one time. And it's pathetic. It's kind of humorous, but it really is pathetic. And since these groups have such a hard time getting along together, guess who holds the key to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre? It's an Arab. It's a Muslim. And he has to go down there every day and unlock the door and open it up so the rest of them can go in and do the stuff. And then he locks it up at night. So, yeah, it is. It is. So the Temple Institute, now this comes to the golden menorah that you were showing a picture of, was produced by the Temple Institute. They have other instruments, articles for the temple, looking forward to rebuilding the third temple. They have priestly garments all constructed and made. They have musical instruments for the third temple. And so we'll see the Temple Institute. They have a little program they take you through.
So do they have the Ark of the Covenant?
No, no, they do not have the Ark of the Covenant. They think they know where it is.
They do. They're keeping it very up
Yeah. Now, the city of David, which is the true old city, okay, where David had his palace. And we will visit this also, and this tremendous archaeological site. So here you see excavations of the ancient Jebusite city. And not too long ago, some discoveries that may actually go back to the altar that was used by Melchizedek. There's debate over whether that's what it was, but there are some things that date back to that time. They look, well, there's a lot of questions about them, but it may be the altar dating back to that time. If that's so, that might have been the very site where Abraham worshipped with Melchizedek. That's pretty exciting. So excavations at David's Jerusalem, the Gihon Spring, the water source for the ancient city of Jerusalem, and Hezekiah's tunnel. And Hezekiah's tunnel, I think, is just, I love going through Hezekiah's tunnel, because you read about Hezekiah bringing this water into the city, to the pool of Siloam. And here you can go through this tunnel, and there are a couple places where you have to stoop down a little bit, especially at the beginning. Then it gets taller and taller. But the water is running through there. It's about knee high to thigh high, maybe up to your waist in some places. But you can actually see on the walls the pick marks that were made by Hezekiah's men as they were carving this out. And if you look closely enough, you can find the middle point, because as you're going, the pick marks are going this direction, and coming back, you see them going this direction, and where they meet in the middle, that's where they did it. It's really, I mean, it's a remarkable engineering feat at that time for these people to be digging underground towards each other and being able to meet up together.
Engineering.
And that, yeah, and they have the gradient so the water flows. I mean, that's today with sophisticated equipment that would be difficult, you know. But with what they had, it's just amazing. The pool of Siloam has undergone a lot of development just in the last few years, and this is really an amazing. And from the pool of Siloam, we don't have the next thing because I haven't updated these notes, but there is the Pilgrim's Tunnel, that goes from the Pool of Siloam underground all the way up to the Temple Mount. Now, the Pool of Siloam is huge. It's like an Olympic-sized swimming pool or even bigger. And it was a place of purification. It was a mikvah. So Jews in biblical times bringing their offering to the temple would have to purify themselves by immersion before they went up to the Temple Mount. Then they could go from there up this tunnel up to the temple, and then they could ascend the steps up and then present their offering. And that has just recently been opened to tourists, and we'll be able to go through that. The last time we were there, just a portion of it was open. But just, I think in the last couple of months, the whole thing has been opened from beginning to end. So I'm looking forward to going through the whole thing.
Actually, up on the Temple Mount then?
Yeah, it comes up just below the Temple Mount. Yeah. And last time we were there, we had one lady in our group. Unfortunately, she was claustrophobic, and she really got freaked out in there.
In the tunnel?
Yeah, it's in the tunnel. Yeah. So
No, I saw pictures of it last night, and it's
yeah,
it's wider.
yeah, it's wider
It's a
now.
lot wider,
They've
and
dug it
it's-
out a lot more
Mhm.
since
And it's
that time.
very well lit.
Yeah,
Has architectural
Yeah.
beauty.
architectural beauty. They've got
It's
good
uphill
ventilation
the
in
whole
there.
way.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Mount Zion on the Western Hill. Now, remember we talked about the location of Mount Zion. There's biblical Mount Zion, which is the Temple Mount. Mount Zion today is on the Western Hill, and it's just called that. But there are several things on the so-called Mount Zion. The Church of the Apostles is an ancient church dating, we think, back to the time of the Apostles. Now, there's been a more modern church built on top of the old church, but the foundations of that seem to be from the time of the Apostles. There, David's tomb. Now, this is probably not the authentic David's tomb, but it was constructed as a memorial to David. It's still called David, and it is a synagogue. And above David's tomb, same building, just upstairs from it, is the upper room. And we think that's pretty likely authentic. If you go back and you read what Peter says in his Pentecost sermon, he says, David's tomb is with us. And if that site is authentic, it was just upstairs from David's tomb. So, that's at least a possibility. And then over on Mount Zion on that Western Hill, a little removed from David's tomb, the upper room, you have the house of Caiaphas, the high priest. And it was in this house of Caiaphas where Jesus was imprisoned overnight, awaiting his crucifixion the next day. And in the basement of Caiaphas' house is still this ancient dungeon, basically. It dates back to the 1st century. And you can actually see probably the actual place where Jesus was imprisoned the night before he goes to the cross. So, what can we do in 10 minutes? We've got to do Bethlehem. Let's see. I've got a question here. Go ahead.
Yeah. What kind of elevations are the different places that you talked about? I mean, is it like 100 feet? Is it 200 feet? 50 feet? Like the Mount Zion, the Temple Mount? What kind of differences are we looking at? Is it really rugged terrain or?
Yeah. Okay. So the whole time we're in Jerusalem, we'll be on, paved walkways. So it's not like rugged terrain, like out in the wilderness somewhere. It's pavement, but there are a lot of steps up and down. Jerusalem is at the top of the Judean mountains, and the whole time we're in Jerusalem, we're going to be going up and down and up and down and up and down. There's a lot of up and down walking, and it depends on where you're going as to how many feet it is. So we'll walk down the descent of the Mount of Olives to the bottom. That's all going downhill, so it's pretty easy. but then there'll be a lot of uphills also when we're in Jerusalem. So just be prepared for the day or days that we're walking around Jerusalem for a lot of walking up and down. So I don't have statistics or figures for how many feet, but it's a lot of up and down walking. Teresa?
The tunnel that goes up to the Temple Mount it's all uphill.
All uphill.
But it's
pretty even, pretty
flat
steady.
for like 8 or 10 feet, and then what do you call it? Terraced almost. You know, it's not like it's an incline that you're having to hike up.
Yeah, right.
And so I whined, but I figured I could do it.
Yeah, and Hezekiah's tunnel, obviously we're going from Gihon Spring to the Pool of Siloam. So that's downhill, but it's very, very gentle. You almost think you're walking level the whole way. So, it depends on where we are. There'll be a lot of up and down, though. Okay, quickly, Bethlehem. What can we do in 6 minutes? Let's go for it. Bethlehem. The name Bethlehem is in Hebrew pronounced Bet-Lechem. Bet-Lechem. So Bet is the word for house, Lechem the word for bread. This is the house of bread. Sometimes it's called the Bethlehem of Judah because there was another Bethlehem in biblical times up in Galilee. So this was Bethlehem of Judea, also known as Bethlehem Ephrata. Micah 5:2 refers to Bethlehem Ephrata. So only 5.5 miles south of Jerusalem. Okay, here's a note. Second town in Israel, also named Bethlehem in Zebulunite territory, 7 miles northwest of Nazareth. The earlier name of Bethlehem was Ephrat. That's why it's called Bethlehem Ephrata. So Ephrath, Genesis 35:19 is another name for it. This is the burial place of the matriarch Rachel, okay, Jacob's preferred wife. So Rachel was buried here. Bethlehem was given to the tribe of Judah, was in the territory of Judah, according to 1 Chronicles 4, verse 4. And a number of people are associated with Bethlehem. Micah's Levite, the Levite's concubine, Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz from the book of Ruth had their home there. David, King David, was born there, raised there. It was his home. Bethlehem is called the city of David only once in the Bible. That's in the Gospels. The city of David usually refers to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is referred to many, many times as the city of David. But David did live in Bethlehem. So did Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. And Elhanan, one of David's mighty men, was from Bethlehem. So David was anointed in Bethlehem by Samuel during his being chased and fighting against Saul. He longed for water from its well, and his mighty men went and fetched him water from it. Bethlehem was fortified by King Rehoboam in 2 Chronicles 11. Bethlehem was rebuilt when they returned from Babylonian captivity, and it's mentioned by Ezra and Nehemiah both as a city that they rebuilt. This is very important. It was prophesied as the birthplace of Messiah in Micah 5:2. We find the fulfillment of that specifically in John 7:42. It was the birthplace of Christ in Matthew 2 and Luke 2. The slaughter of the babies by Herod the Great, we've all read about that. Matthew 2 took place in and around Bethlehem. Now, when we get into the 2nd century AD, Emperor Hadrian expelled the Jews from Bethlehem. So this is the same Hadrian who renamed Jerusalem as Aelia Capitolina and renamed Judea as Palestine. 405, Jerome finished his translation of the Latin Vulgate in Bethlehem. And one of my favorite places to visit is the grotto of Jerusalem, of Jerome, in the basement of the Church of the Nativity, because this is where he finished his translation. Jerome actually went to the Jewish rabbis to learn Hebrew, so he could translate directly out of the Hebrew for the Old Testament. And of course, he knew Greek, but by 405, most people didn't know Greek anymore. They were speaking Latin, so he wanted the people to have the Bible in their own language. The great irony of history is that then later on in the Middle Ages, the Roman Catholic Church said that only the Latin Vulgate can be used, and by that time, nobody spoke Latin anymore.
Except the priests.
Except the
that's why.
priests. Yeah, that's why. So they got locked up. But Jerome's intention was for the people to have the Bible in their own language so that they could read it and understand it. So today, Bethlehem is controlled by the Palestinian Authority. It has a population of about 22,000, including the suburbs of Beit Jala and Beit Sakur. And there used to be a strong Christian majority in Bethlehem. Today, there's a tiny minority of Christians because they've been so harassed by the Palestinians.
When did that change?
Well, it's been changing gradually for the last 3 decades. Yeah. So in Bethlehem, you've got the Church of the Nativity. And here's some statistics on it. It was built 325 of the Byzantines. The present church, built by Justinian, the Byzantine, in the 6th century. The Crusader Baldwin I was consecrated there. Another Crusader, Baldwin II, was consecrated there, that church. When we visit it, we'll go through this doorway, a tiny doorway. You have to stoop down to go through it. And that was constructed that way to keep mounted riders, cavalrymen from getting in there. You'd have to dismount and not only have to stoop down. But it is said that the stooping down makes you humble yourself before you enter this church, which is an interesting thought. Okay, so there in Bethlehem is the Shepherd's Field. Those are really, really neat to visit. And then the tomb of Rachel, we mentioned that Rachel was buried there. So we were going to go down to Masada and the Dead Sea for the students that are taking the quiz. You'll just have to read the notes here and study up on that before you take the quiz. And we'll try to cover this next week, but you've got to take the quiz before next week's class. So we'll pick up with Masada next week.
Can you go to 9 o'clock?
Oh, we do. Oh, I've got time. Oh my goodness. Okay. Thank you.
See, and I didn't even look. I just believed you and figured it was
Yeah.
not.
I thought, oh, he must be tired tonight.
Yeah. Okay. Let's just keep going. I'm all for it.
Masada.
Let's go to Masada. In Hebrew, it's pronounced Masada. Masada in Hebrew means a fortress. And Masada is a fortress, but it's also a natural geological site. So Masada is located near the southwest shore of the Dead Sea, on top of the isolated rock cliff on the eastern edge of the Judean desert overlooking the Dead Sea. So from our hotel, it won't be very far to Masada. We'll still have to go on the bus to get there. But it's this huge plateau raised up on a big rock cliff. And it has cliffs on all sides of it. This is what makes it such a tremendous fortress. Nobody can just, enter into Masada. The only way up in ancient times was a winding path called the Snake Path. And very steep. And it's usually very hot down there by the Dead Sea all year round. So you're not going to rush the fortress of Masada and overtake it. It's going to be very difficult, almost nearly impossible to conquer Masada. So the cliffs on the east edge of Masada rise 1,475 feet high, 132 feet above sea level. Dropping off to the Dead Sea, the cliffs on the west are about 330 feet high. The natural approaches to the cliff top are very difficult. Now, the top of the plateau is flat and rhomboid shaped. And I have I haven't taken you to pictures. Let me just bring up a few of them. I've got a whole bunch of Jerusalem pictures here. I don't, but let's take a look at Masada here.
But Jesus was never at Masada, was he?
Jesus was not that we know of. Not that we know of. There's En-Gedi. There's the Dead Sea. God, that's some pictures of Masada. This is Qumran. Must have passed it. Should be before this. Oh, this is on Masada. Okay. So, okay, here we go. Oh, this, okay. Here's what I want. Yeah. So let's take a look at some of these pictures. This is an aerial view of Masada. You can see it's rhomboid shaped, and you see these steep cliffs on all sides. Now, there's a ramp on this side. This ramp was built by the Romans when they finally conquered it. They had to construct this whole ramp in order to get up there. This is a plan of Masada. This is the wall all the way around it. The entrance is right here. And there are various buildings on the inside that we can see. Herod had a palace up here at the northern end of Masada. And there at the northern end, he could pick up the breezes that would blow down, and that was the most comfortable place. So that's where, and there are steps actually leading down. There are about 3 different levels here to this palace. Now let's see what we can see here. Here's some of the storehouses up on top of the plateau. And you can see off here in the distance, that's the Dead Sea. There's a synagogue up on top of Masada, and this is the synagogue. This was where the decision was made by the Jews defending it from the Romans to take their lives rather than be taken captive by the Jews.
By the Romans. Yeah.
What's that?
By the Romans.
By the Romans. What did I say?
Jews.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Never mind what I say. Just pay attention to what I mean.
Just know your Bible.
Okay.
He's just making sure.
We're awake.
Okay.
It's only 8:30.
Here's inside the synagogue and some of the pillars that used to hold up the roof. Here's the bathhouse that was built by King Herod the Great. And the way this is constructed, you've got a floor here. You have a space underneath for water to come into contact with the heated stones and produce steam. And you'll notice in the wall these tubes with holes in the side, so steam actually could come out. So this was a hot sauna, basically, is what they had. And so here's now those are all the pictures of Masada. I want to come back to my document here. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about this rhomboid shape. You just saw it. About 1/3 of a mile by 1/6 of a mile, 1,950 feet by 650 feet. That's the size of that, and it's pretty big. Takes a while to walk all around it. A wall around the top, totaling 4,600 feet, about 9/10 of a mile, and 13 feet thick with many towers. The fortress included storehouses, cisterns that were filled by rainwater. They had barracks up there for soldiers. There were palaces and an armory. There are 3 narrow winding paths that led from below to fortified gates. And again, you could only make your way up these paths very slowly because it's very, very steep. I've never gone up the path. I've run down the path a couple of times, but we're limited on time, so we'll see what we can do. It may have been the stronghold of David. Now, this is questionable. It's one of the questions on the quiz. Where might Masada have been mentioned? In 1 Samuel 22, verses 4 and 5, also 1 Samuel 23:14, and 1 Samuel 24:22, you have a reference to the fortress of David down in the Judean hills, and he uses the word Masada, the fortress. So wasn't the same place. It might go back to Davidic times, not built up like Herod the Great had it built up, but it would make sense because it's just a naturally fortified place with all those cliffs on all sides. Jonathan Maccabee, during the intertestamental period, did build a fortress. That's the first fortress built on top of Masada that we know of. Jonathan Maccabee. Herod the Great then did a lot of building up there, built up Masada between 37 and 31 BC as a refuge for himself should his Jewish subjects rise against him. So that was planned. We don't have any evidence that Herod the Great ever actually visited Masada, but he had this great place built. Now, could he have been there? Yeah, he might have, but we just don't have any record of it anywhere. In 66, at the beginning of the Jewish uprising against the Romans, a group of rebels called the Sicari, known as the Dagger Men, took Masada from the Roman garrison stationed there. Now, the Sicari were Jewish zealots who absolutely despised the Romans, and they felt that any Jews that gave any kind of allegiance to Rome were absolute traitors. And so they would go into a crowded group of Jews, and once they had identified somebody that was sympathetic toward the Romans, one of the Sicari would just come up to him, pull out a dagger, stab him in the back, put his dagger away, and then slip off. And that's why they were called the Daggermen. And this group of Jews that thought they could, rebel against Rome and succeed like the Maccabees did, tried to get together a force of guerrilla fighters, and they made a station up there on Masada. Now, the Sicari, you wonder, well, why don't we ever read about the Sicari in the New Testament? There may be a reference to the Sicari. There is one individual who is named in the New Testament who seems to fit, and his name may be derived from the word Sicari, and that is Judas Iscariot. The word Iscariot comes from Ish, which means man. Ish Sicari could easily become Iscariot. So if this is Judas the Sicari man, it would make sense that he would not think that Jesus was suitable to be the Messiah. The Sicari wanted a great military leader to come in and conquer Rome and make Israel victorious and make Israel great again.
Well, he sort of stabbed him in the back.
Yeah, he kind of stabbed him in the back, didn't he? So this is one theory about the meaning of the name Iscariot. We don't know for sure. There are a lot of theories about what Iscariot meant, but it's not real obvious to us what it means. But it's possible Judas might have been a Sicari, or maybe his father had been a Sicari. He was Judas of the Sicari man. Okay. Herod the Great. Okay, we have the Sicari there. AD 70, they were joined by additional Sicari and their families who were expelled from Jerusalem by the other Jews living there shortly before the destruction of Jerusalem. And for the next 2 years, Masada was used as a base for raiding and harassing the Roman and Jewish settlements alike. So these were the defenders of Masada that we read about so much. In AD 73, Lucius Bossus, the Roman governor of Judea, died, and Flavius Silva marched against Masada with the Roman legion laying siege to the fortress. They built a circumvallation wall, that is a wall around the base of Masada, down in the floor, valley floor below. And that was to keep the defenders from coming down and going out to get supplies and bring them back. So this is basically to isolate Masada, and they were going to try to starve them out. But there were so many stores of food and water up on Masada that Herod had stashed there that they could have lasted for years. But they built this circumvallation wall, and then built a rampart against the western face using thousands of tons of stones and beaten earth. And you saw that picture of that ramp. And this was the only way that they could successfully conquer Masada, and they could roll their battering rams up this ramp and then beat down the wall. And Josephus has a very, very detailed description of how the Romans accomplished that. In the spring of AD 73, after about 2 to 3 months of siege, the Roman forces breached the wall of the fortress with a battering ram. And when the Romans entered the fortress, they discovered that its approximately 1,000 defenders had set all the buildings, except for the food storerooms, ablaze. And they committed mass suicide rather than face certain capture or defeat by their enemies. Now, the reason they didn't burn the storerooms is they wanted the Romans to know they didn't die of starvation. They had lots of food left. And if the Romans hadn't battered down the walls, they could have lasted for a couple of years probably. It was really quite something. There were 2 women and a few children that didn't commit suicide, and they hid out, and they came out to tell the story. That's the only reason we know the story of the mass suicide that was done, and then it's recorded by Josephus. Okay, there are other things that happened there later on. Some Byzantine monks resided there. Then Masada falls out of knowledge historically until 1842, and it was kind of rediscovered that recently, and it was extensively excavated between 1963 and 1965. Moshe Dayan, a very famous Israeli archaeologist, was in charge of those excavations. A pair of cable cars now carry visitors who do not wish to climb the ancient snake path. We'll ride the cable cars up there. Now restored on the east side of the mountain. The Roman ramp is still there, and some people go up the Roman ramp to get up onto Masada.
So it goes all the way from ground level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It took them quite a while to build that, and they ran into trouble because while they were trying to build the ramp, the Jews up above would just throw stones down on it.
Sure.
So what they finally did was the Romans brought in some Jewish slaves and made the Jewish slaves build the ramp because they knew that the Jews up above wouldn't kill their own people. So the ramp was built by slave labor. So here's a number of things that can be seen on Masada. We've already mentioned a lot of these. And there's that 3-level palace I mentioned at the north, the scroll room, the breach point where the Romans battered down the wall. So there's another palace. There's the remains of a Byzantine church up there. So, okay, En Gedi, I'm going to skip, but we will visit En Gedi. The name En Gedi means the spring of the goat kid. And this is, there's a waterfall that comes down. It's one of the water sources that flows into the Dead Sea. And it's fresh water, but it's at En Gedi is where David hid out from King Saul when he was being chased by Saul. And we'll get a chance probably to walk just to the first waterfall. There are 3 waterfalls. And then if you go on further, you can get way up on top of this Chalcolithic site up there where worship was carried on. But we'll probably just get a hike up to the first waterfall. And that's a fairly good hike. And it's a beautiful place. But you can see the caves in the side of the cliff on the hike up. And in one of those caves, David and his men were hiding when Saul went in to relieve himself, and David cut off the corner of Saul's robe. Yeah. So we can see those. Okay. I want to come down and mention a few facts about the Dead Sea. And we're going to start our tour actually at the Dead Sea. This is what it's known as today. It is called in the Bible the Salt Sea. In fact, that's actually the modern Hebrew name of it. So the Salt Sea. It's referred to as the Eastern Sea in Ezekiel 47 because it lies to the east of Jerusalem. Everything is related to Jerusalem. It's called the Sea of the Arabah. That part of Israel is called the Arabah in the south in Deuteronomy 4:49. It's also, another name is Asphaltis. Now that's a Latin name, but it's based on the fact that natural forming asphalt comes up from the depths of the Dead Sea and actually is sometimes seen floating on the surface of the water.
Stink.
Yeah, it's there's definite smell. Yeah.
Same thing.
Okay. So the Dead Sea is located on the east of the Judean wilderness in the Jordan Rift Valley. It's the lowest point on the face of the earth, lowest point on the surface of the earth. The surface of the water is about 1,400 feet below sea level. Okay, this is a very round figure, but that's an easier number to remember. So the lowest point of the seabed is another 1,400 feet below the surface. That's up at the north end. It's very, very deep. It's 48 miles long by 8 miles wide. About a third of the way up from the southern end, there's a peninsula. We talked about this earlier, a peninsula that extends in from the east side. And it is called the Lashon, which is the Hebrew word for a tongue, because it's shaped like a tongue, this peninsula. Now today, so much of the Dead Sea is dried up that peninsula now extends all the way across. It's no longer a peninsula, but it's a land bridge all the way across. So to the north of it, you have the deep part of the Dead Sea. To the south of it, very, very shallow, which is still used for mining minerals in these evaporation ponds. Yeah, Lishan or Lashon. Aramaic is Lishan, Hebrew is Lashon. The north end, okay, we said that. The Dead Sea has the highest concentration of minerals. Look at this, 25% mineral content. So you can't even, if you take salt and pour it into a glass of water and try to dissolve it, you can't dissolve that much salt into it.
We go there first so that we get all of our healing
Yeah.
minerals before we
before we go elsewhere. And people do. People come from all over to soak in the Dead Sea because it does have healing powers. There are spas that are built on the Dead Sea where people go and soak. You can float in the Dead Sea. It's so buoyant. You can just, lay out there. And in fact, it'd be very difficult to drown in the Dead Sea. Now, you could burn your insides out by swallowing the water. You have to be very careful not to get that water in your eyes or in your mouth. So when you go in, just be careful. But people go in it all the time. And then there are showers after you get out to rinse yourself off. You want to rinse all that water off. You leave it on you, it can burn your skin. So, but 25% concentration of minerals, the highest of any natural body of water on Earth, including salt, potash, magnesium, calcium chloride, bromide. And so these are all mined out of the Dead Sea. And the mineral concentration makes the Dead Sea highly buoyant and also fatal to marine life, which is why it's called the Dead Sea. There's no marine life in it. Bitumen or asphalt occurs naturally, can be seen floating on the surface. A hill of salt at the southwest corner has eroded into strange forms, including pillars, which are known as Lot's wife by the local Arabs. So you read about Lot's wife being turned into a pillar of salt. Yeah, like Mono Lake.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Oh,
very
that
similar to, Alkali Lake, like Mono. Yeah. Only just intensified, I guess. In Old Testament times, the sea formed a natural barrier between Judah on the west and on the other side, Moab and Edom. So the question had come up earlier about the Edomites. So the southern part of the Dead Sea on the other side was Edom. Towards the north end of the Dead Sea on the other side is Moab.
They were all descendants of Abraham from other children. Right?
Yeah, yeah. So the Moabites are actually descendants from Lot.
Okay.
And when his daughters committed incest with him, they wanted to have children.
This is the sea where Sodom and Gomorrah were originally.
Okay, so Sodom and Gomorrah down by the south end of the Dead Sea, and there are a couple of different potential sites for Sodom and Gomorrah. So there is a well-known site on the east side, the southeast side, where a lot of archaeological excavation has taken place over the last several decades. There's actually a man who is, he used to pastor a church just down here in Woodland. And he goes there almost every year. He has spoken at our Alpha Omega conference, and he has a very, very nice museum down in Woodland. It's worth visiting. It's not too far away from here. But he works at one of those sites.
What's his name?
I'm trying to remember. Well, maybe I'll think of it, and maybe I won't.
I like that. Maybe I will.
Okay. During the millennial kingdom, now this is an interesting part of biblical prophecy. During the millennial kingdom, the Dead Sea will be transformed into a freshwater lake fed by a stream that will flow out from Jerusalem. The stream will actually originate in the temple and flow out and go down to the Dead Sea and make it fresh water, and it will be teeming with fish, according to Ezekiel 47, 1 through 12, and Zechariah 14, verse 8.
It'll probably flow all the way down into the Red Sea, right? Into the Gulf of Aqaba.
Well, from the Dead Sea to the Red Sea, you go uphill.
Okay, how about to the Gulf of Aqaba?
That's the Red Sea.
Yeah.
So there's no indication that it goes that far, but it might. You'd have to fill it up way, way up in order to get that high to get to the Red Sea. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay, good. So that's where I wanted to get to tonight. We have 5 minutes left. Are there any questions? Yeah. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
When we were talking about the 7-Day War and so forth, there was a man who produced a movie that was just shown in the theaters for one day that was to honor that actual experience of not destroying Jerusalem at that moment. Did you know about that?
No, not if it's a recent film. I don't know anything about it.
It was only one day, and we had to find the theater that was down here in Southern California that was showing it near us.
Yeah.
Only like 1/10 of theaters were promoting it, but yeah. I'll see if I can learn more.
I don't know if we'll show it up here or not. But did you see it?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, was it good?
Yeah, it was our Sunday school class went to go watch it. Somebody found out about it.
Yeah.
And it was a honorary video about what had happened, and they just had it in theaters for one day.
Wow.
I'll see if I can find out about it.
Yeah, do that. I'd like to know more about it. Somebody had their hand up. Was it Anna?
Yes, it was me, the cat. I was wondering, are we going to go by Sodom and Gomorrah and just look at where they propose it was?
Well, we won't actually look at the site. The principal site is actually on the Jordanian side, so it would involve a border crossing to get there. But I'll tell you one interesting thing about Sodom and Gomorrah and that region, and what we will see. We know that the Bible says that Sodom and Gomorrah and the whole region around there was destroyed by fire and brimstone that rained down from heaven. So there is really littering the valley floor all around there. There are rocks that are scorched. There's no volcanic activity right nearby. And nobody has a good explanation for why those rocks are scorched. But if God had rained down fire and brimstone back in the time of Sodom and Gomorrah, that would explain that. And we've actually picked up some of those scorched rocks and brought them home because I think that's what they are. I think they're left over from the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Are we going to be able to look at those rocks?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Oh, good, because I wanted to know what they look like, fire and brimstone.
Yeah.
Or brimstone.
Well, the rocks themselves are not brimstone. Brimstone is a kind of sulfur. These are just rocks, natural rocks from that area that have been scorched. So the brimstone was falling down, and sulfur does burn with quite a heat. So the sulfur was coming down from the sky and setting the whole place on fire. And so we now have what you see are these scorched rocks lying all around on the ground.
That's fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah. So, okay. Anybody else with a question, comment?
I found or Mr. Google found for me the Museum of Biblical Archaeology in Woodland with Pastor Carl Morgan.
Carl Morgan.
Okay. Good job.
So I finally remembered. Yeah. And he's a great guy, and he loves to show his museum.
Yeah, I've been actually a while back, like 8 years ago. It was really cool though. It's built like kind of basically the back of his church, or the church that's there.
Yeah.
The next time I'm down that way, I'm gonna go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a website.
I can imagine that we don't know about that. We're right here.
Yeah, I know. It's not that far away.
Right. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, everybody, Laila Tov, and God bless you. And I'll see you again 1 week from tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gunn.
Okay. You're welcome. God bless.
Good night.
Good night.
Night. I was expecting